I want you to imagine that you and the love of your life have just broken up. Or at least you thought they were the love of your life. The connection between the two of you was instantaneous, the chemistry undeniable. They lifted you up on your darkest of days, made you feel like the best version of yourself, and then it was over. You'd been dumped. How would this make you feel? What specific thoughts, behaviors, emotions would you experience in the aftermath? I don't know about you, but I'd feel pretty freaking sad. More than that, I'd stop enjoying a lot of the things I normally did. Hobbies, conversations with friends, even my favorite foods. I'd lose sleep, feel fatigued and sluggish all the time. I'd have trouble concentrating on much of anything other than the breakup, that is. I might even start to feel really guilty, ruminating on how the breakup was my fault. And throughout it all, I'm sure I would feel just worthless. I'm not you, you're not me, but I suspect that you can relate to at least a good portion of that reaction I just described. And so I want you to answer in your head 2 questions. Is that reaction depression? And is it a mental disorder? The answer to the first question, according to most psychologists, would be yes. Depression is complex, persistent low mood encompassing a whole host of psychological and physiological alterations, all of them miserable. But the diagnostic definition of depression is simple. If you experience to a significant degree for 2 weeks, 5 of these 9 symptoms, one of which has to be either sadness or anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure, then you meet the diagnostic criteria for major depressive disorder. That breakup reaction that I described earlier encompassed 7. By the consensus of the field, the reaction I described is depression. Now onto the second question, is it a mental disorder? Again, the psychological consensus says that yes, it is. The American Psychological Association calls depression a mental illness. But is it always? Disorder is a disorder, and it implies something going awry, something going wrong psychologically. Yet, most, or I suspect all of us, can see ourselves experiencing a depression in response to relatively common life stressors. It could be a brutal breakup, like I described earlier, or imagine that you've lost your job. Imagine you're struggling through a brutal school semester under the weight of external expectations. Imagine you've moved somewhere new, haven't hit it off with anyone, and feel totally alone. Data backs up intuition here. Depression is common. The lifetime prevalence is measured at around 20% in Canada, but it's likely far higher even than that. So what's going on here? Is there something wrong, disordered with all of our brains? Or even if some cases of depression do undoubtedly stem from true dysfunction and biological disorder, is there something more going on here than experiencing a depression equals having a mental disorder? I think there must be. And today I'm going to offer you one answer as to what that is. Depression is an evolutionary adaptation. Now, that sounds ridiculous. How could that be? How could feeling depressed of all things be a trait that maximized reproductive success over evolutionary time? The first point I'll make is that evolution by natural selection doesn't care about your happiness. All that matters is a trait's ability to put copies of itself in successive generations. You could live your life in a state of perpetual misery, but if you produce a large number of viable offspring, from the perspective of natural selection, that's an absolute win for your genes. And the second point I'll make in terms of depression as an adaptation is that we already know it can be. When you're sick, you get depressed. You feel down, you lose sleep, you struggle to concentrate, you can't enjoy most of your normal activities. But this depression isn't accidental. Instead, it enables the reallocation of physical and mental resources away from any possible distractors and towards what's important, fighting the infection. If you were starving, truly starving, you would be depressed. But again, far from being maladaptive, this enables the reallocation of limited physical and mental resources towards the priority, in this case, finding food. Maybe the depression we're familiar with is the same kind of thing. At least that's what the analytical rumination hypothesis proposed by Paul Andrews here at McMaster says. It says that faced with a real, serious, intractable problem in your life, especially something social in nature, it makes sense, in evolutionary terms, to enter a persistent, aversive state in which you ruminate over and over again about the problem facing you. You think about how it got there, why it persists, how you should have avoided it, and how you would if you just could have a do-over. And this rumination is painful, and this rumination is costly, metabolically costly, as neuroimaging data shows. Despite this, it can confer real adaptive benefits at the cost of that downregulation of behavior that depression entails. Individuals can make sure they avoid blundering and rushing into potential solutions in a very volatile situation. And they can also learn lessons. They can learn lessons from that experience through the rumination that they can apply to future events. There are other hypotheses other than this about how depression could have evolved as an adaptation, but all share the idea that depression, though undoubtedly very costly, brought, on average, real fitness benefits over time. So what is all of this to say? What does this all mean? Firstly, here's some things it isn't to say. It isn't to say that some cases of depression don't result from disorder as we understand it. And it also isn't to say that we shouldn't try to mitigate and treat depression regardless. Depression is, by definition, miserable. It is to say, though, that we need to think about how we need to think about depression and how we treat it differently. And it means that if you do find yourself at some point feeling really depressed, don't be quick to blame your brain for being broken. Don't think there's something wrong with you. Maybe there's something wrong with the situation, and your brain is just doing the best that it can for your genes. Thank you.